Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David Ige.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, aloha and good Monday morning. I'm Ryan Kalei-Suji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. I want to thank you for starting your week off with us. To start off our week, we are going to be catching up with the Honolulu Prosecutor's Office, and there's a lot of news coming out from that office, Yanji.
Absolutely. Such an important part of our government. And so Steve Alm is joining us now from his office downtown. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good morning, Yanji. Good morning, Ryan.
So let's dive into the case that has been making headlines over the last 2 weeks or so. For those who have not been keeping close track, just in a nutshell, what did the Supreme Court decide and how is that affecting your office?
Okay, in the Obrero case, the Supreme Court, 3 members of it, it was 3-2 decision, decided that a 1905 statute, which said if you want to charge like a serious felony, it has to go to grand jury. In 1982, there was a constitutional amendment, which was then ratified by the voters, which said, in addition to grand jury, you can also take cases in front of a judge at a preliminary hearing. And the Supreme Court, in what I think was a wrong-headed decision, said, no, the 1905 statute is what still should control. Chief Justice Rechtenwald, in dissent, said, no, when you have a constitutional amendment like that, it superseded the original, that any statute before that. But the net effect of that, which we are living with right now, is any case you took to a preliminary hearing and a judge found probable cause that's now set for trial, you have to take to a grand jury now. And the net effect for our office is we have 160 serious felonies, 25 murder and attempted murders, 40 robberies, 30 domestic violence felonies, kidnapping, sex assault, that we are going to have to get the witnesses, get the victims to go to grand jury now, even though we had already done a preliminary hearing.
We know that there have been some within the prosecuting office, as well as those on the neighbor islands as well, that have called for a special session so the legislature can come to session to address this and add language, to the and amend this. We spoke to the governor last week. He felt like it was unlikely that there was going to be a need for a special session on this. Your reaction to the governor, as well as what the speaker and Senate president are saying about the possibility to fix this in a special session?
Right. Well, all the county prosecutors are on the same page with this. And we've been talking repeatedly to members, including every single member of the House and Senate I have, or left messages for them, that we need a special session, because there's no question. I know there's some irritation at the legislature that the judiciary created this problem. They should solve it. Our concern is they're not going to be able to solve it. It's a cumbersome process to get new grand jurors there. And understand, we only have 3 sessions a week right now, 2 mornings and an afternoon. That, if all things go well, you can typically do 3 cases during that time, although a murder case takes the whole session. So we're just keeping up with current cases. We have 160 that need to go in. So we are calling for a special session. We realize it's a lot more work for the legislators, but if they can go into special session, they'll be able to fix the law easily to make preliminary hearing be an alternative as well. What that would do is 2 things. One, it would mean we could immediately start taking cases back to preliminary hearings. And every case we could take to a preliminary hearing means we can use that slot to take care of one of these 160 cases. Secondly, we like to take all domestic violence felonies to preliminary hearing. Because there's a defense counsel there with a chance to cross-examine the victim, that means in 6 months or a year, when that domestic violence case goes to trial, if the victim's too afraid to testify won't, may flee the jurisdiction, we can put in the transcript from the preliminary hearing and win the case. So I think as I talk to members of the House and the Senate, when they really understand it, I am confident they're going to call for a special session. And I know there's been some voices who've said there really is no need with it. I totally disagree with that. There's a definite need for it.
There's a question here from the audience. Michael Kitchens, who runs the Stolen Stuff Hawaii website, says, what needs to happen to provide more grand juries so that our judicial system can be back up to par? If it's only 3 sessions, why haven't more been implemented? It is a will issue or a funding issue. Absent the special session, is there a way to ramp up the grand juries to meet that need for those 160 and beyond?
Good question. We need to have both things happen. The judiciary needs to be sending out letters, bringing more people in, setting up more grand juries as soon as possible, because that has to happen. The special session will help us do some preliminary hearings, but the majority of the cases are still going to have to go to grand jury, and all of the 160 will have to go to grand jury. So there's no question we need both to happen, and it's got to happen as soon as possible, because the defense attorneys are interested in getting their clients out of jail, the ones who are pending trial. We're interested in protecting the public, and I think the legislature and the judiciary realize that's part of their role too. So we need both. We need more grand jury sessions as soon as possible, and we need a special session so we can both start doing preliminary hearings and allow that to happen. Because make no mistake about this, if we don't do this, people are going to get released and they're going to commit crimes. These are serious charges, and the folks that we've charged with it, we don't want out. We want them to stay in jail until the trial is completed.
When this ruling came down from the Supreme Court, were you caught off guard, or your office, kind of taken aback by this ruling? I mean, this was something, as you noted, that was implemented in 1905, then amended right in 1980, as you mentioned, and now we're dealing with it here in 2022. I mean, was this something that your office had thought could happen, or how was your reaction, I guess, to this?
We knew overall from the oral argument that there were questions about this, so we thought there was an outside chance. We never thought they'd do it, because even in a footnote in the majority's decision, it says smart legal minds can disagree on this, reference the dissent. The Chief Justice wrote a very logical, compelling statement about why a constitutional amendment supersedes any statute in the past. So we were confident that there's a legal argument on both sides to this, but that common sense would prevail, because there's no question this is going to get fixed by the legislature. But is it going to happen sooner or later? And are more people going to get released from prison, from jail, to commit new crimes? So we were really surprised that the Supreme Court came down this way. We always knew there was a chance, but read the Chief Justice 12-page dissent or whatever it was. It's smart. It lays it out. It's simple. That's the way we thought the Supreme Court would end up going, using some common sense with this.
Tell us a little bit about your dealings with lawmakers up until this point. We know, as Ryan noted, that the governor said on this program that he thinks it's unlikely. We hear the Senate president saying what he's said about probably not having this happen. What are you doing behind the scenes to try to push lawmakers to call for this?
Well, we have had Zoom meetings with all of the county prosecutors, with the chairs of the Judiciary Committee, with the Senate President, Speaker of the House. I called every single member of the House or Senate over the weekend, spoke to some, left a couple-minute messages for others. I think part of it is just, they're really busy. They may have other things to take up, recess appointments. And so it's getting them to understand how serious this is, because nobody except some defense attorneys want to get some people released and have crimes committed. So we're trying to make the case that this is important enough to come back in a special session, even though it's going to be busy, it's going to cause. But I think the legislators want to be on the side of public safety. And so I think once they really understand the issue, and that a special session will help, because otherwise, if you wait for the regular session and they don't convene to the third week in January, it's going to be the middle of February or end of February. That's 4 months away. We can't wait that long. Public safety should not be put on hold for that 4 months.
And so if a special session is not called together, and this is something that remains until that time frame that you just laid out in 4 months, when do you foresee this starting to take effect, where the office is forced and the courts are forced to release some of these these offenders?
We don't know. It's good. Within a month, we're going to see some real problems, because there'll be hearings on whether to dismiss the cases or not. And at some point, all of these 160 are going to get dismissed. What we're going to ask the judge, because they were brought via preliminary hearing, and even though we disagree with the Supreme Court, that's the law of the land as of today. So those cases are going to get dismissed. We're going to ask the court to hold the person in custody while we recharge them. But there are only so many spaces to recharge people right now, because there aren't enough grand jury sessions. And I hate to say it, but holidays, people get busy. Grand jurors don't show up as much. We could have trouble getting a quorum. And we're talking every day is important. Christmas is going to take out a day. Thanksgiving's going to take out a day. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road. And we need every possible session for grand jury in order not only to keep up with current cases, but to take care of these other 160. It's like the guy who's fighting extradition, right, on that cold case. That case, grand jury takes a whole session for that. All the murder cases are going to take a whole session. So those 25 are going to take 25 sessions by themselves. So this is a real crunch. And, we don't know exactly when. My guess is we'll be seeing in the next few days, I think 40 motions to dismiss have been filed. We'll see when those get heard. Can we keep the person in custody and then prioritize and drive it through? I'm so proud of our deputies. We've been sitting down with the division chiefs and team captains to strategize about prioritizing murder cases first and the like, so that when we do have to deal with it, we can try to save as many of these cases as possible.
In your conversations over the weekend with these lawmakers, have you been encountering any resistance and folks saying, well, let's just wait for the actual session? What have those conversations been like? No one, of course, when you lay it out in the way that you do, I think few would want to release the offenders that you're talking about. So what are the arguments that you're hearing against going into special session?
Well, it's more just, learning about it, because, legislators have to deal with a million issues. So precise details about criminal justice and new, cases that come down for the non-lawyers, or even for the lawyers that do civil practice, this is all new. So it's more a question of learning about it than being adamantly against it. I think there are concerns about the time crunch, about, other issues they might have to deal with. And I know the Senate has to come back in session to deal with all the judges that are getting appointed in the meantime, but that's just the Senate. So it's getting both sides. It's more a question of discussing what the challenges, issues we're facing. And the neighbor islands have an even more challenging situation than we do, because they have, Hawaii Island has 220 cases because they made use of preliminary hearings more often than we did. That guy who was arrested for kidnapping that teenage girl who was caught, by somebody recognizing the Amber Alert, he was arrested over the weekend. They happened to have a grand jury session. They only have 2 grand jury days a month, but one of them happened to be on the Wednesday after it, so they could take the guy to grand jury. If that wasn't set for a couple of weeks, there's no telling what would have happened. He might have been released. That we, at least in Honolulu, have grand juries every week. So if we have something horrendous like that, we can move that case up to the top and try to hit that one first. But it is a case-by-case thing. And the neighbor islands often have only 1 or 2 days of grand jury a month. They're going to have to get ramped up too. The judiciary across the state is going to really have to put their nose to the grindstone and get a whole bunch of more grand jury sessions as soon as possible.
Well, in our prior conversations, you had talked about the number of things that your office was trying to do, and now we've this has been added to your plate. So we can only imagine the workload that your office is dealing with right now. Want to turn our attention to something else that was also highlighted a few weeks ago, and that is the Safe and Sound Waikiki program that was launched in an effort, of course, with a partnership with the city and county and other stakeholders in the area. How is this new program you hope to help to improve what's happening in Waikiki and keep both residents and visitors safe?
Well, we're really happy about the way it got started. There's so many people in Waikiki who want to make it safer. There are residents who send us information on where crime is occurring. We're working really closely with Major Platt and the police officers there. There were 7 arrests on the calendar this morning from Waikiki. There were, I think, 20 some last week. Part of it is the safe part means making Waikiki safer. And that means arresting people. That means trespassing some from certain areas. It's working closely with the security groups from all of the hotels. But it's working with the residents and them telling us stuff. But it also, the sound part is getting efforts that are already going on there, trying to improve them, working with the residents in Waikiki, because there are a bunch of residents. There are 2 elementary schools in the site, Jefferson Elementary and Waikiki Elementary. And it's just a good way to bring a lot of people together and work. It's gotten a really good start. We look forward to it just continuing.
When do you think we'll actually see the impact of a program like that? When can residents expect to see real results?
Well, we've gotten some positive emails from residents already, because I think what's very visible is when you look at the substation down to the wall, that area has a lot of homeless folks. It has a lot of crime. That's where that guy looked like he had a gun, and there was a big incident recently. That's a very public area, because when you go from the Moana down, in the Ewa direction, you have a lot of hotels, but each one has their own security service and stuff. It's where it really opens up that a lot of attention needs to be paid. The city's they have those 4 pavilions. Pavilion 4 is kind of in bad shape, but the city is committed to getting a tenant in there as soon as possible. And I think that's really going to help. And this Sudafast program that we started in Chinatown, trying to get these chronically homeless folks assessed and into treatment as soon as possible. We're looking at we're starting to do that in Waikiki as well.
One of the things that you'd also talked about during this press conference was asking, judges to impose orders restricting people convicted of crimes from visiting Waikiki for 6 months or a year. If you can talk more about that idea and how that would be enforced and implemented.
Okay. Well, last week, on one day, half the people were held pending a trial, so that's fine. That puts off that decision. Another 4 pled guilty. We asked for the geographic restriction. We didn't get it in any of the 4 cases. It's an ongoing effort to try to get the judges to, consider public safety as well. And I think we'll keep pushing that. We'll keep publicizing it, that if folks are committing a crime in an area, they don't have the right to be there. That's a condition of probation that has been in place for decades. I think what's frustrating is when we did weed and seed in Chinatown and Kalihi the first time, the judiciary granted it every time we asked for it. And we don't ask for it if somebody lives in the site, works in the site, or receives services. But we all know there are a number of people that go to Waikiki, to cause trouble, to rip off tourists, to get in trouble. Well, they don't deserve to go everywhere they want if they're going to commit crime there. So we are trying to do it. Somebody was convicted of, we're doing these habitual property crime cases now, where if people have a string of cases. The first one was Lawrence Smalls. He had 161 convictions with no more than a day or 2 or a few in jail each time. Well, we charged him with a felony. He's pled guilty. He got a year in jail. Early release to a treatment program. But a guy like him would almost always steal alcohol from ABC stores or other stores. Well, he needs to go to treatment, because if he can stop drinking, then maybe he'll stop stealing. We look at each of those cases individually, and we've discovered that a number of them, 5 out of 6 so far, are homeless and are often stealing drugs and alcohol.
There are a number of questions in the comments about guns and conceal and carry. We know that in our conversations with Chief Joe Logan that, they are preparing to grant conceal and carry permits. And he talked about some of the challenges that could present for HPD. What are your concerns about the ripple effect of people now being more widely allowed to carry guns in our community?
Well, I know that, a lot of people who want to get a concealed carry permit are responsible citizens. We trust they'll be responsible. They're the ones who have gotten permits to own firearms already. What we're concerned about is that human beings are human beings, and we have enough road rage cases as it is. We just hope this doesn't lead it to escalate. And the other part of it is that over the years, Hawaii has a very low murder rate, very low, always in the bottom 10 of the state's violent crime rate. And we just hope, so over the years, even the crooks haven't felt the need to be armed, when they're out and about all the time. We're just afraid that, if they think other people are going to be armed, they'll be armed too. So it's a big unknown. But again, it's the law of the land now. This is what the U.S. Supreme Court has come down with. So HPD and the other county prosecutors, are going to be issuing permits, and we're going to be prosecuting people if they break the rules on that. One thing we would ask people to be as responsible as possible, because there are going to be certain areas where they're going to be prohibited from taking a gun to, like a school or maybe a mall. Well, if they're going to be doing that, don't take the gun out of your home to begin with, because if you get to the mall and think, oh yeah, I can't take the gun in there, and leave it in your car, somebody breaking into your car could find the gun. We want to avoid things like that. Same thing with asking people to be as responsible as possible, so it's locked up when it's at home, so little kids don't get a hold of it and, end up having shootings as we see across the country on a regular basis.
I want to ask you more of a procedural question of the way your office processes things, because, you've been obviously in this position for just a few years as in this elected seat, but you are no stranger to obviously the judicial system. And over time, we have just seen the advancement of technology with cameras and also body cameras now with police officers wearing. How has the introduction of video footage impacted your office in determining some of these cases where there is use of force, or in other cases where you've had to review videotape? Because I imagine from where you started, years ago to where it's now, processing has become much more advanced with the use of video.
Absolutely. It's been tremendously helpful, both body-worn camera footage plus the surveillance footage that's out there. It becomes very helpful to either show wrongdoing by somebody else who then complains about a police officer using force. Well, the video may show that's not the case. So it helps that way. And I think it keeps police officers on their toes knowing this. And more, HPD is working with the officers, because sometimes they get out of the car, they just forget about it, But at other times, they just got to be reminded to keep doing it. We just, did an officer-involved shooting investigation and had a press conference last week about it, showing the officer was totally justified, because as soon as he got out of his car, he turned it on. And it showed the defendant with a knife refusing to put it down, and independent witnesses saw stuff. It was very helpful. The one thing that really surprised me was that I hadn't thought about before getting elected almost 2 years ago, was every body-worn camera footage that HPD has to be reviewed by our deputies before any charges come in. So for misdemeanors, that means from 6 o'clock in the morning on, we have people reviewing the footage for all of the cases from the day before. So like I said, there were 7 arrests in Waikiki for safe and sound this morning from the last couple of days. Well, our deputies had to review that from 7 o'clock on. And if you have it could be a disorderly conduct, but if there are 4 officers involved in it, they got to review the body camera footage on all 4. It really has added to the workload of the deputies, clerical staff and everybody. I mean, it's a good thing, but it really added to the workload in a way that I had not thought of before coming in here. We've had body-worn camera footage since 2017, but its use has been ramped up every year.
Speaking of workload, and we know that this new decision could add, the Obrero decision could add, a number of issues that you had laid out in the top of our conversation. But when we have talked in the past, you had mentioned that there was quite a significant backlog because of COVID protocols. How are you doing in terms of chipping away at just the caseload for your staff, and where do you stand on that right now?
Well, we're so happy that jury trials finally started up again, because our deputies during COVID over the last couple of years saw their caseloads, of trials increase from like 30 to 50 some. And even when they're not going to trial, you still have to send out subpoenas. You have to talk to witnesses. You have to explain it. So we're hoping that more and more jury trials can take place, so we can, because when jury trials are taking place, some cases are handled that way. But also the defense wants to work out plea agreements, and we can do that as appropriate. But when there are no trials going on, the defense doesn't want to deal anything, because they're hoping it will get dismissed for a speedy trial reason. So the cases have ballooned. They're going down now because there are jury trials, and good plea agreements can be made. So we're headed in the right track. But then we had the Obrero case that threw this huge monkey wrench, and so we're having to. The day after the decision, I called chief of police about it, and I said, Joe, your officers are going to get subpoenas to come for cases, and tell them it's not a mistake, because they may have already testified at a preliminary hearing about it, and yet the same case is now having to go in front of a grand jury. So it's the victims of sex assault who already testified at a preliminary hearing because the courts were closed and we couldn't take it to grand jury. Well, they had to relive it then. They're going to have to relive it again at grand jury, and then later at trial. The domestic violence people, those are the cases our hearts go out to them. But it's a situation, this is the hand we're dealt. We will work like hell to keep these folks in custody, not get released, so they don't commit new crimes.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I did want to just allow you a final message, maybe to those viewers out there who are hearing the potential ramifications of this happening. And if the special session does not go and get called into session, the delay that this may cause. Well, what is your message for the public out there who may be worried that this could happen and maybe want to do something, want to get involved? I mean, what is your message, I guess, to the public during this time?
I would encourage them to call their state rep or state senator, as well as the governor, and leave a message. You're not going to talk to them personally. They're really busy, but leave a message saying you support the special session, because they need to hear from their constituents. And this is a kind of a complicated issue, and it's inside baseball for some of it, but trust that it's going to take a tremendous amount of work. A special session will happen sooner, and it will allow more cases to get charged, fewer people to get released. It's better for public safety to have a special session.
Okay, Honolulu Prosecuting Attorney Steve Alm, thank you so much for spending your Monday morning with us. We really appreciate your time.
Good to see you folks again. Thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you. Well, Ryan, you heard him there advocating for folks to call their lawmakers, call their representatives, saying that this needs to happen as soon as possible. He is very concerned. We wrote down some of the numbers. He said 160 cases that were charged in that preliminary process. And he says that those include 25 murders, attempted murders, and manslaughters, over 40 robberies, and other serious crimes like arson, kidnapping, and sexual assault. This is a very serious issue that some folks may not have been paying attention to, but now we'll have to contend with if lawmakers don't take this up. He said that he's worried that they'd have to wait till the regular session, and it might not be remedied for months.
Yeah, and in our speaking with Governor Ige last week and asking him about this issue, one of the things that he noted is he felt that the legislature did not, one, have consensus amongst its own members to decide on what to do and how to fix this, and two, if members even agree to come into session. Of course, a special session just can't come together. It needs to be voted on. There needs to be a majority of those members deciding that this is something that they want to do. And so we heard from the prosecutor saying that he's personally called and left messages with all of them, citing the importance of this and noting that if they were to wait for the regular session to this be addressed in middle January when session starts, that doesn't mean that this gets addressed on the day that the session opens. This will take some time to go through the process of committee hearings. And so we are looking at potentially 4 to 5 months before this issue is even resolved if we are to wait for a regular session for this to be addressed. And so the prosecutor really laying out his case as to why lawmakers should come back into session. And again, as you heard, making that plea for the community to also get involved if people feel that this is a serious issue, to call lawmakers and urge them for this special session to be called into order.
Yeah, and you heard him noting that this is really a statewide issue. The 160 cases that he laid out are for the city and county of Honolulu. That does not include the hundreds of other cases on the neighbor islands. And unlike here in Honolulu, the grand jury here, he said, meets 3 times a week. Grand juries in some of the neighbor island counties just meet a few times a month. And so we could be looking at, a lot of folks being released there that the folks in his office and the people who work in analogous offices on the other islands say should not be released because this is a public safety issue. This is certainly not the last we've heard of this. He said, as you noted, that he's been calling those lawmakers and really trying to educate them. He says he's not really hearing a lot of pushback in terms of, wanting to call a special session, but really having to tell lawmakers why this is so important and what the ramifications could be. One other thing that he noted is that, police officers could have to be called back to speak before these grand juries, in addition to the victims of these crimes. And you just think about the shortage of staff that HPD is already under. If you take those officers off the street, then having to go deal with these issues. Also, his office has quite a big backlog because of COVID. And now those prosecutors are having to spend time on this. It's just the ripple effect of this decision is far and wide.
Yeah, and interesting to hear that the office knew that this might happen, that there were rumblings of it, but they didn't really think that it was actually going to happen in this case that actually started all of this, that resulted in this Supreme Court ruling. But noting that obviously this office is one that is strapped. They have a lot that they're carrying. We also briefly talked about the Safe and Sound Waikiki program that has just been started. He noted there have been 7 arrests this morning alone, and that they are really beefing up that area on the safety side, but also really talking about the sound aspect of it, which is the community involvement and making sure that the residents in the area, that those who live and work in that community are invested into keeping it safe, that it's not just the arrests that happen when crimes break out, but really planting the seeds for a foundation where people can be held accountable and to create a safer environment for both residents and visitors alike, similar to what they are doing in Chinatown. And we know from previous conversations with Steve Alm that this is something that he would like to continue to do in other communities outside of what's happening here in urban Honolulu. So always a lot to discuss with him. We could have talked a lot more on a variety of other issues, but it's only half an hour show.
That's right. And on Wednesday, we are diving into another contentious issue, and that is the stadium. What should happen with that big plot of land at Halawa? The governor catching some folks off guard by saying that he doesn't think the public-private partnership is needed anymore, and that authority should be transferred from DAGS to DBED. So what does DAGS have to say about that? Chris Kinimaka from DAGS is going to be joining us, along with Ryan Andrews, who heads up the Stadium Authority. Both of those folks, in their comments to the newspaper, seem to be caught off guard by this decision. So they're going to lay out their positions on this, and we're really looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to that. We thank you for being a part of this show this morning. We'll see you right back here on Wednesday for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Until then, take care. Aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.